When I have conversations with different plan managers or directors of operations, for example, usually the conversations go about how has the OE improved or, let's say, decreased based on weekly performance, based on monthly performance, and then you can start seeing a trend because at that point you have enough data points to have a conversation about. The other item that I've mentioned a couple of times is that it's usually much easier and it makes a lot more sense to benchmark against the line or the facility that you're in, but also very closely related facility. For example, when I worked for a food and beverage facility that had 4 different facilities making the exact same product, that's when you can standardize on the metrics. There's going to be some nuances. If you have different equipment from different manufacturers, maybe there will be some discrepancies, but at least you're making the same product. The process should be the same, and then you can start comparing between different facilities. If you're looking at an oil and gas process and you're trying to understand as to why in a pharmaceutical based facility you're not reaching the same OEE, it's going to be very difficult to justify or explain simply because there is so much of a difference in the process and the variables. So usually you want to benchmark within the same industry, within the same facility, within the same process, and within the same product. The last conversation point that I do want to address is how often you should be pulling OEE from your equipment. And as I've explained a couple of times now, OEE is a fairly lagging indicator. There's very little you can do besides resolve the fault that you currently have on the line, reset the machines, and then start going. You obviously can resolve a deficiency in quality, for example, but that's not really going to be looking at your OE. You're going to be looking at the quality metrics on the number of rejects, and you're going to have a very different trend line, hopefully, on your machine and on your equipment to figure out some of those issues. When it comes to OE, you can be pulling data every 5 minutes. You can even store that data every hour, and usually there's not going to be a whole lot of need to be polling your PLCs or your control systems, your DCS, on a very narrow interval. And I see this mistake all the time. Again, if you're being sold a specific piece of machinery or maybe a solution that is going to be pulling that data into the cloud, you start seeing a toll on your networks. This is not going to be OE related. OE is going to be a fairly slow and steady metric that you want to collect, obviously with certain delays, but ultimately you don't need it every millisecond. And to the point that I've made earlier, you probably aren't going to look at your OE every hour and make very specific decisions. Your operators might need a Kanban board which can display the OE for the last hour, but it is usually not something that is going to be very forward looking.